What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you alongside my trophy because it is championship week. It is upon us. I hope you guys brought your big boy pants. Shout out to Arnold Palmy in my league. Do not take this trophy away from me, but at the same time, congratulations on your championship. It was well deserved. I hope you have a great championship matchup versus yours truly. Whether you win or lose this week, just remember, enjoy it, because Dynasty, redraft, this is all going to be over for about 8 months in terms of actual players on the field playing for our fantasy team. So whether you win or lose, make sure you enjoy this week because we won't have it for another 8 months or so. If you guys want the rankings, of course, I didn't even say what I'm doing here. Week 17 wide receiver rankings for fantasy football championship week. If you guys want the whole list, I'm just going to be going over my top 24 in depth in today's video. If you guys want the whole list, make sure to check out the link in the description. You guys can see all my wide receiver rankings there, as well as the other positions as well. Like, comment, subscribe if you guys enjoy this video. Let's fucking go. Let's hit this intro. All right, as always, the wide receiver matchups are on the screen as you guys can see them. We have all the metrics across the board: rank and adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, rank and pass defense DVOA, rank and PFF coverage grade. As you guys can see, the Rams wide receivers, Devontae Smith, the Bills wide receivers, Bucks wide receivers, those guys have great matchups this week, whereas Terry McLaurin, Cordero Patterson, Justin Jefferson, etc., don't have as great of matchups. If you guys want to see a bigger version of this, I have tweeted it out, so you can check out my Twitter. Look for the guys that you have on your fantasy team, but I will leave this on the screen above me throughout the duration of the video. Wide receivers 1 through 8. We're going to start with the top 8 wide receivers. Davante Adams rounds out my number 1 wide receiver for the week. Adams is the only receiver that Patrick Peterson has shadowed this year. As you guys can see, Patrick Peterson is expected to be his shadow coverage matchup or his primary matchup in coverage this week. But Adams went 7 for 115 and 2 the last time he played Minnesota. And as you guys can see on the screen, Davante Adams has absolutely lambasted Minnesota every game he's played against them over the last, 3 years or whatever that he's been an elite fantasy wide receiver. So I hope they shadow Davante Adams again, because Davante Adams is probably going to go hog wild in this game. We just got reports that Kirk Cousins is now on the COVID list. He's going to be out for this game. So Green Bay figures to dominate the time of possession in this one, probably run a lot more offensive plays than what Minnesota's running with Sean Mannion as their starting quarterback this week. I expect Davante Adams to probably feast in this one, do his Davante Adams versus Minnesota thing, basically. So number 2 on the list is Stephon Diggs. Now, Stephon Diggs proved last week that matchups don't matter for him, because J.C. Jackson was his shadow matchup. Wasn't a great matchup. He's been arguably one of the best corners in the league. And Stephon Diggs still proved why he's one of the best receivers in the league. He went, caught 7 of 13 targets for 85 yards and a touchdown against J.C. Jackson. Pretty much every single catch that he had that I was watching was against J.C. Jackson. The Bills are implied for 29.25 points this week, highest in week 17. AJ Terrell has looked very good this year, who is the best corner on the Falcons, is expected to see a good amount of Stephon Diggs, but he hasn't shadow covered receivers. He hasn't been asked to do that this year. So there are going to see opportunities and mismatches where Stephon Diggs is on a guy like Fabian Moreau or their other corners. And that's when Stephon Diggs is probably going to get the majority of his production. So he is a guy that I'm absolutely firing up as a top 3 wide receiver this week. Speaking of top 3 wide receivers, and pretty much the best receiver in fantasy without a doubt this year has been Cooper Kupp. Double-digit targets at 14 of 15 games this year, which is absolutely insane. The only game he didn't have double-digit targets in, he had 9 targets. So far and away, the best wide receiver in fantasy this year. He sees Tavon Young in coverage. We probably won't get Lamar Jackson back. As of today, he isn't practicing, so it looks like we're going to get Tyler Huntley on the other side of this game for the Baltimore Ravens. Hopefully, this can still shoot out to some degree. Cooper Kupp will definitely get his. Tavon Young, allowing a 72% catch percentage, doesn't have a very high PFF coverage grade as well. I think Cooper Kupp is probably in line for a pretty big one in this game. Number 4, we have Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown set a whopping 50% target share last week with Mike Evans out of the lineup, and that was despite seeing shadow coverage from Stephon Gilmore against the Carolina Panthers. Mike Evans just got activated basically off the COVID list today, but he is still dealing with a hamstring injury, so we don't know 100% if he's going to play in this game. We'll probably hear pretty soon if he's expected to play on Sunday or not. But either way, if Mike Evans plays or if Mike Evans doesn't, I still think this is a great spot for Antonio Brown, assuming his ankle issue of his own is all right, because he didn't actually practice yesterday dealing with an ankle issue. But Bruce Arians is notorious for giving veterans rest days. So I wouldn't be shocked if that's what that was. But either way, Antonio Brown, if he's on the field and Mike Evans is or isn't on the field, is still a top 5 wide receiver in my rankings. The Jets are just going to be severely outmatched and out-talented by the Buccaneers offense and Buccaneers wide receiver core. The offensive line's not going to allow any pressure. The receivers are going to create separation at will. Tom Brady's going to have a whole lot of time, and that is a recipe for disaster for the New York Jets defense. I expect Tom Brady to probably not even finish this game. I think it's going to be that big of a blowout. I don't even think Tom Brady is going to get through the third quarter in this one. So hopefully he's able to put up, 300 yards passing, 3 touchdowns or something for those of us like myself who have Tom Brady in our fantasy championship matchup. I really think this is going to be a blowout, similar to what we saw in Detroit this time last year in the fantasy championship. So Antonio Brown, fire him up with confidence. He is a guy that I'm absolutely starting with 100% certainty this week. Number 5, I have Justin Jefferson. Now, again, you might be able to downgrade him a little bit because I did make this list before the news came out that Kirk Cousins wasn't playing. Justin Jefferson went hog wild last time that they played the Green Bay Packers. And even though he's going to have Sean Mannion as his quarterback this week, he went 8 for 169 and 2 touchdowns back in week 11, I believe, when they played the Green Bay Packers the first time. Jair Alexander has been activated to the 53-man roster, but I highly doubt he plays in this game. LaFleur said he basically is going to get ramped up. I expect him probably back for the playoffs, not necessarily for this game. So I doubt he's playing this week. Regardless, though, Justin Jefferson has double-digit targets in 6 of 7 games. Even with Sean Mannion as the quarterback, I expect Justin Jefferson to feast in this one. So Justin Jefferson, as you guys can see on the screen, pretty favorable matchup for him. He did a lot of work against these guys the last time they played. Number 6, we have Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, obviously, extremely disappointing week for you last week. 2 of 19. They might have knocked you out of the playoffs entirely, but if you survived and you're in the finals with Tyreek Hill, he has to be in your lineup. Even if you have other great options, he has the highest weekly ceiling of any player in fantasy. I'm 100% confident in saying that because Tyreek Hill can go, 11 for 168 and 3 touchdowns like he did back in week 3 or whatever it was against the Philadelphia Eagles. So this is a guy that you absolutely have to have in your lineup. Of course, I don't think anybody was going to sit him, but I've seen some people ask in the comments that they have Justin Jefferson, Keenan Allen, all these great options. Should they sit Tyreek Hill? Absolutely not. He has a chance to go absolutely hog wild in this game. Number 7, we have A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown came back fully into form last week. He was out there for 86% of the Titans' routes, commanded a 53% target share, including 80% of the total air yards and deep targets and 100% of the end zone and red zone targets. So he was basically, the alpha has returned. He is the alpha receiver, and Julio Jones was playing, and he still was able to do this. Julio Jones is probably out for this game. Now, the Dolphins have been very good on defense recently, allowing the second fewest points to wide receivers, but if you look at the teams that they've played over that 5-week stretch or the 7-week stretch that they've been on this big win streak, the only capable wide receivers they've played have been Elijah Moore and DJ Moore, and both of them posted 100-yard games against them. So I still believe in A.J. Brown's ability, his ability to command targets, his ability to be as good as he is, to be able to put up a good stat line against Xavier Howard, who we will see in shadow coverage in this game. Either way, though, A.J. Brown in your lineup, he proved last week why he's still one of the best receivers on the planet. Number 8, closing out the top 8, I have Deebo Samuel, and he's down a little bit from where he normally would be because Trey Lance is expected to start in place of Jimmy Garoppolo. And Trey Lance, the reason I think he's a little bit downgraded is because Trey Lance is going to take away a good share of the pass volume in general because he's a rushing style quarterback. They're probably going to pass the ball a little bit less when he is starting. He only threw 29 times in his first start against Arizona. And in that game, Deebo still had 9 targets and he had a carry for 13 yards and a touchdown. So he was still heavily involved in the game plan. But Trey Lance being the starting quarterback definitely just downgrades the pass volume as a whole in the offense. Of course, we still have George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk who are capable of commanding targets in their own right. So Deebo Samuel, again, a guy that I'm still willing to start, but I had somebody ask, the other day, should they start Justin Jefferson? Should they start Antonio Brown, or should they start Tyreek Hill or Deebo Samuel? And I told them to sit Deebo Samuel because I think of those elite options, I think he has the most concerns. And maybe now that Justin Jefferson doesn't have his quarterback, that changes. But either way, Deebo Samuel is a guy that I think you absolutely have to start unless you have just some elite options around him. Wide receivers 9 through 16, as you guys can see them on the screen right now. Deontay Johnson tops the list in this tier of wide receivers. Deontay Johnson reeled in 6 of 13 targets for 98 yards the last time that the Browns faced the Steelers. I got a sneaking suspicion that Big Ben is probably going to bring something to this game. This might be his last game. It probably is his last game at Heinz Field, where he spent his entire career since 2004 when he was initially drafted by the Steelers. So I could see Big Ben coming out with a nice, send-off game for his final one in Heinz Field. Deontay Johnson is expected to split time between Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams. So either way, I expect him to be able to produce. We know Deontay Johnson is at this point. He's 10 to 12 targets on the high end during his games, and he usually just catches a whole bunch of passes for those of us that play in PPR leagues. Number 10 and number 11 are both on the same team, so I'll kind of just group these guys together. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, they both slot in at the back end of my top 12. Bengals Chiefs, the game that they see this week, currently has an over-under of 51 points. We know that the Kansas City Chiefs are capable of putting up points on the other side of the ball. Could definitely be a shootout type of atmosphere, but the Chiefs corners aren't pushovers. So I don't want to make it seem like the Bengals are just in a smash spot here, because the Chiefs corners have played very well. The defensive coverage grades of Mike Hughes and Charvarius Ward and some of their corners have been pretty good. So Jamar Chase and T. Higgins might have a little bit more of a tougher matchup than they had last week, but it's still, in terms of a game script and game environment, should set up very well for the Bengals wide receivers. Now, closing out the top 12 with Dallas Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb hasn't scored a touchdown since week 10 against Atlanta, but I'm betting that streak probably comes to an end this week in Arizona. Marco Wilson has already been ruled out by Cliff Kingsbury, and we already had Robert Alford, who's on IR. So without Alford and Wilson, that just leaves Byron Murphy as the only starting corner from the main three starters that they had at the beginning of the season when they were a really good pass defense. Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, and Amari Cooper, they're all going to see time away from Byron Murphy. So I really like all of these guys this week. But of course, CeeDee Lamb tops out the list as the number one wide receiver for this team in terms of, targets and ceiling on any given week, and expected to have the easiest matchup on the field against Hamilton. I think he's probably the guy that I would start if I had to choose between all the Cowboys wide receivers. Number 13, we have Keenan Allen. Now, Keenan Allen had a really brutal game last week, and it was mainly just due to the Chargers being awful on offense against the Houston Texans, which, I mean, nobody saw coming, but it was a game on the road against a team that is a little bit better of a defense than a lot of people think. The Chargers should be able to control the time of possession against Denver this week at home. The game that they lost to Denver earlier in the season was on the road in Mile High, which is always a hard environment to play in. This game is at home. Drew Lock is the starting quarterback instead of Teddy Bridgewater, and the Broncos recorded the fourth lowest time of possession last week after failing to move the ball really at all on offense against the Raiders. Keenan Allen is pretty much a lock for 10 plus targets. I think the Chargers probably dominate this one 35-25 in terms of time of possession, and that's going to lead to a lot of offensive plays, potentially a lot of passing, and a lot of up-tempo game environment for the Chargers offense, as we know that they like playing. A lot of targets in turn for Keenan Allen. So number 14, we have Jalen Waddle. He is coming off of 3 straight games of double-digit targets and 90-plus yards. So this is a dude that has consistently been performing all throughout the duration of his rookie season. The Titans rank second to last in terms of adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers. They are an absolutely smash matchup for Jalen Waddle. He sees Elijah Molden in the slot, who's allowed a 71% catch percentage, and also is a pretty big mismatch in terms of speed and athleticism to a guy like Jalen Waddle. So I think Jalen Waddle, similar to last week, just has the best matchup on the field. I expect him to probably catch 6, 7, 8 passes just like he did against the Saints on Monday night. No qualms about starting Jalen Waddle as a top 15 wide receiver, especially in PPR leagues this week. Number 15, I have DK Metcalf. Now, this might be a little high for where DK Metcalf has performed recently, but if you somehow made your championship with DK Metcalf, let's say you just had a really strong roster and you traded low for DK Metcalf, you didn't draft him, because if you drafted him, you probably are not in the fantasy semifinals or the fantasy championship this week. But with this dude, there's no time like the present for him to have a big game. His primary matchup in coverage, Melifonwu, has allowed an 86% catch percentage and 2.57 yards per route covered. And again, yards per route covered is the cornerback version of yards per route run. So basically what Melifonwu has done is turned any wide receiver that's gone up against him into like Deebo Samuel, Antonio Brown, Cooper Kupp territory in terms of how productive that they're going to be. So DK Metcalf has to perform this week. This week is just way too easy of a matchup for him. The Detroit Lions are just allowing everything to wide receivers. I think DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who I'll talk about in a second, are set up for big-time success this week. Hopefully, Russell Wilson and the Seahawks are able to play well. And again, Russell Wilson, much like Big Ben, has also kind of teased at the fact that this might be his last game in, CenturyLink Field in Seattle, because, there's rumors that he could get traded this offseason and he could come out and provide a big performance against a pretty bad, despite, scrappy Detroit Lions team. So number 16, we have Michael Pittman Jr. Michael Pittman Jr. has a 40% target share over the last month. The volume is crazy right now. It just hasn't, equated to big time fantasy production, and mainly due to the fact, similar to CeeDee Lamb, he hasn't scored a touchdown since week 9. I think he could get back on track in that department this week. Michael Pittman Jr. is expected to see Desmond Trufant, who I didn't even know was still in the league, but Desmond Trufant has a pretty good PFF grade so far this year, but is relatively a washed up cornerback. So I think Michael Pittman Jr. should be able to take advantage of that matchup. Now, getting into wide receivers 17 through 24, and then I'll head out of here. Number 17, DK Metcalf's teammate, Tyler Lockett. Boomer bust Tyler Lockett, as he is henceforth known. Since week 7, he has as many games of over 110 receiving yards as he has games of 30 receiving yards or less, because he is boomer bust Tyler Lockett. That's what you're going to get out of him. But they've typically come against good matchups with his good games. So when you look at this matchup against Detroit, as I kind of already talked about for DK Metcalf, Will Harris is a pretty bad corner as well, allowing a 72% catch percentage along with the bad catch percentage of his teammate Melifonwu. I think both of these guys are viable this week. And if you're playing DFS, I think Russell Wilson stacked up with his top 2 weapons is also a very viable strategy in this game against the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are going to be starting Tim Boyle instead of Jared Goff. So there's a good chance that the Seahawks finally are able to generate some first downs and dominate the time of possession for the first time really all season. The Seahawks are sneakily like the second worst team in the NFL at generating first downs, which is really, really crucial to sustaining drives, obviously, and to scoring fantasy points for wide receivers. Because if you're going 3 and out all the time, or you're, turning the ball over all the time, you're not going to be on the field to catch a lot of passes in the cases of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Number 18, we have Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's floor has been pretty low lately. We've seen a lot of floor games in recent weeks, but he's set up for a good spot this week, similar to what he was last week against Washington. With the Cardinals only having one starting corner, as I mentioned, for CeeDee Lamb, this is the type of environment and the type of game that Amari Cooper smashes in. When you can see a smash spot coming for Amari Cooper, that's usually when he goes off, and that's what we're probably getting this week. Again, he is expected to see a good amount of Byron Murphy, but he's going to see time on the other side against Marco Wilson's replacement, whoever that is. I don't even know who it is on their roster right now. Could see some time in the slot against Hamilton as well. So Amari Cooper set up for a great game. Number 19, we have Hunter Renfrow. He's cooled off in recent weeks, but Darren Waller, again, still out, placed on the IR. Not the easiest matchup for Hunter Renfrow against Kenny Moore in the slot. And it's a slower paced game environment. Both of these teams like to run the ball quite a bit, but he's still the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver for his team. Still a guy in PPR leagues that has a 10, 12 target ceiling that we've seen out of Hunter Renfrow for a good stretch of the entire season so far. So Hunter Renfrow, a guy that I think I'm willing to start still as a top 20 wide receiver, despite the recent down performances of the Raiders offense. They haven't scored over 20 points in the past 2 games. Number 20, we have Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown will have Tyler Huntley back for this game. Probably not Lamar Jackson, as I kind of talked about already. But Marquise Brown saw 14 targets 2 weeks ago with Tyler Huntley as the starting quarterback against the Green Bay Packers. So even though he has a tough matchup against Jalen Ramsey this week, Tyler Huntley has just fed Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown. So I expect that to continue. He's a guy that I'm definitely still willing to start. If you want to go a little bit more risk averse away from Marquise Brown, because he could have a bit of a down performance, then you could start some of the guys I'm about to talk about ahead of Marquise Brown. But the targets have been there with Tyler Huntley, especially at quarterback. And the ceiling is there still for him to break off a big play if you guys need it. And this is the championship week. We need every bit of ceiling that we can get. Number 21, we have Odell Beckham Jr. The Rams are set up for a great pass matchup. Obviously, we just saw what the Cincinnati Bengals did to this Ravens secondary. Joe Burrow throwing for 500 yards. I don't think it's going to get any better for the Ravens corners in this game, because Anthony Averett, who was the last remaining of their starting corners, is also out for the season. Now, I'm firing up Odell Beckham Jr. and Van Jefferson with confidence this week, along with, of course, Cooper Kupp. In DFS, I'm expecting that I'm going to own a lot of Odell Beckham Jr., Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, etc. So Beckham expected to see Jimmy Smith in coverage. Of course, they've probably seen each other a decent amount going back to Odell Beckham Jr.'s days in Cleveland. Matthew Stafford's just set up for a 300-yard, 4-touchdown type of performance, pretty much similar to what we saw from Joe Burrow last week. Number 22, we see Amon-Ra St. Brown come in. He's performed big time since DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson have been out of the lineup, but is he going to perform with Swift coming back this week? It sounds, by all indications, that DeAndre Swift is going to play this week. Again, Tim Boyle is going to be the starter again. We don't have Jared Goff back. I tend to believe that Amon-Ra St. Brown is probably still going to have a good game, mainly due to the fact that Ugo Amadi is allowing an 82% catch percentage this year. He is allowing just a lot of receptions, and in any kind of PPR format, Amon-Ra St. Brown has been a gem find for a lot of you guys on the waiver wire or whatever. So I'm expecting Amon-Ra St. Brown to probably have another, 7 for 90 type of performance if he can get into the end zone. Obviously, that would be ideal. But he is set up for a pretty good one in this one. Even with DeAndre Swift back, that should elevate the offense as a whole, should help them keep this game competitive and make sure that they don't, fall behind too much against the Seattle Seahawks and potentially Russell Wilson's last game at home in Seattle. Number 23, we have Christian Kirk. And for those of you guys that are new around here, the Cardinals wide receiver and cornerback matchups are the most important of any team because they are the most uncreative offense with their wide receivers. They never move their wide receivers around at all. So the primary matchup is pretty much who they're going to see all game because their snaps are, they put this guy on the left side, this guy on the right side, this guy in the slot, and they don't move them at all. Kirk has a decent matchup because he's going to avoid Trevon Diggs, which is a big deal. Obviously, Trevon Diggs plays on one side of the field. He typically does shadow number one wide receivers, but Christian Kirk hasn't really demanded shadow coverage by any other corner in the league. So PFF isn't expecting Christian Kirk to be shadowed in the absence of DeAndre Hopkins. Christian Kirk also a slot wide receiver where we haven't seen Trevon Diggs primarily travel into the slot. So he's going to see Anthony Brown in coverage, who's been pretty good this year, but he's also had some absolutely terrible games against Hunter Renfrow on Thanksgiving, also against Antonio Brown in week 1. So this is a guy that can give it up to talented wide receivers. I think Christian Kirk has proven that he's got some ability, that he can create some separation. And Anthony Brown, while he's been okay this year, should have a tougher time with Christian Kirk in this one. Number 24, we have DJ Moore closing out the top 24 rankings of this video. DJ Moore, again, will get the Marshawn Lattimore treatment, and I have very little faith in this offense in general to even generate a couple first downs on a drive, let alone score points against the Saints defense. So if you want to downgrade DJ Moore even more than I have him downgraded, that definitely makes sense. You could start a guy like Devontae Smith ahead of him, Terry McLaurin, Brandon Cooks, Mike Williams, etc. I still have DJ Moore here because the targets are still there, and he's still a very, very talented wide receiver that's capable of creating on his own. But again, if you wanted to start any of the guys that I just mentioned over him, I would not blame you. This area of the rankings is pretty fluid for me. So I'll throw the wide receivers 25 through 32 on the board right now and just kind of rapid fire them. I'm not going to show their wide receiver cornerback matchups for everybody, but Devontae Smith against Washington, they're the single easiest defense in the league across the board against fantasy wide receivers. We saw both Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb put up some decent numbers against them last week. Devontae Smith should be in line for a good one in this one. And Washington should also be another team that's going to struggle to move the ball on offense because Antonio Gibson is probably out for this game, who is, one of their best offensive playmakers. So they might struggle to move the ball on that side of the ball. Terry McLaurin, number 26, expected probably to see Darius Slay in shadow coverage. Brandon Cooks set up for another good matchup of a lot of targets pretty much with Davis Mills. So he is a guy that I'm always willing to start. Mike Williams officially off the COVID list against Denver this week. Tougher matchup for him on the outside, but I expect Justin Herbert and the Chargers to probably win this game and put up some decent numbers. So I like Mike Williams this week as well. Van Jefferson, I kind of already mentioned the case for Odell Beckham. The same thing applies for Van Jefferson. Darnell Mooney expected to see probably James Bradbury in coverage, but either way, Darnell Mooney has been pretty good at getting targets. We don't know 100% if Justin Fields will be back for this game, but if he is, we've seen their connection really be good this year. And even with Nick Foles, I think Darnell Mooney is a guy that I'm okay trusting against the Giants team that is pretty much given up on this entire season and their coaching staff. Brandon Ayuk expected to see the Houston Texans, also a pretty easy matchup for him. Chase Claypool against Cleveland. Like I said, Big Ben could want to end off his Steelers career at Heinz Field with a bang. That's it, guys. If you enjoyed this video, as always, like this video, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you want to become a member of the channel and you want to support us, go over to the join button on our YouTube page, about $3.50 American, $5 Canadian per month to do that, to get you priority response to comments during live streams and on videos. Of course, you also get badges, emojis. We'll be doing some members only live streams in the off season as well. We'll also be running some polls. So make sure you check out the members area of our YouTube page. Now say it with me, fellas. We're bringing home the gold this week. That trophy, I don't want it to go anywhere. But again, if you have to reverse jinx your opponent like I did at the beginning of the video, then so be it. That's what we're trying to do around here. Peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.